She spoke Italian to someone on the phone but never imagined someone was listening. And that person is the Mafia boss, the most dangerous man in the city. And hours later he said, "You go nowhere." The rain lashed against the windows of La Rosa Bianca, each drop a sharp whisper against glass. The restaurant's glow fought the storm, golden light spilling over white tablecloths, the soft clink of silverware echoing beneath the hum of a piano. Behind the counter moved Estella, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. She moved like a secret, every gesture quiet, deliberate. Her voice was soft, her English tinged with an accent she tried to bury under polite smiles. She'd been here for 6 months, long enough to seem ordinary, long enough to believe she might finally be forgotten. Then he walked in. The door slammed open with the wind, scattering candle flames. A man stepped through, his coat dripping, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on her. He didn't wait to be seated. He walked straight to her section and sat down, ignoring the hostess's protests. "Buonasera," he said, his voice low, smooth, dangerous. Estella froze. The sound of that language, the rhythm, the weight, tightened her throat. "Would you like to see the menu?" she asked carefully, pretending not to understand. But the man's lips curved. "Non fingere, bambina. Don't pretend, little one. I know you understand." The tray in her hands trembled. Her eyes darted toward the back of the restaurant where Grady sat in his usual private booth. Alone, silent. His reputation filling the room more than his presence did. The local Mafia boss. The man who never missed a thing. "I don't know what you're talking about," Estella murmured. "Davvero?" "Really?" The stranger leaned closer. "You thought you could hide forever?" Her pulse pounded. She took a step back, the glass of wine shaking in her grip. "I'm working," she whispered. He smiled wider, crueler. "Keep working. It won't last long." The next sound was the shatter of glass, a sharp, violent crack that cut through the music. Wine spilled like blood across the floor. Estella's chest heaved, her eyes flashing with something between fear and fury. And from his booth, Grady rose slowly, chair scraping against marble, gaze locked on her like a predator scenting blood. Who exactly was this woman? Would you have stayed silent, or spoken back if someone threatened your life? The moment the glass shattered, Estella's breath caught in her throat. She had unexpectedly cracked her cover, but the people blind to her world didn't know that. Red wine seeped into her shoes as her trembling fingers loosened around the neck of the broken bottle. Every eye in the restaurant was on her, but she saw none of them. Only the stranger's faint smirk as he stood and walked away, unhurried, leaving behind the echo of a threat. Her knees almost buckled. She whispered an apology she didn't mean and turned toward the back door, head down, forcing her body to move before her voice betrayed the scream clawing at her chest. The kitchen swallowed her whole. Heat from the stoves wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. The scent of roasted garlic, burnt butter, and wine blurred into one dizzying cloud. She pushed through the swinging door and collapsed against the wall near the prep table, covering her mouth to silence her sobs. Her hands were shaking, just like that night. The smell of smoke, the roar of engines, the way her brother's hand slipped from hers as gunfire split the air. "Run, Estella! Vai!" he'd shouted, his face lit by the burning mansion behind them. She had run. She'd kept running. Through alleys, across borders, into silence. She'd changed her name, cut her hair, and learned to smile like a girl who'd never seen death up close. But the fire never left her. It lived inside her ribs, flickering whenever someone spoke Italian. And now, after 3 years of pretending, that fire had found her again. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand over her chest, whispering through ragged breaths, "I'm not her anymore. I'm not that girl." But lies sounded hollow when the past whispered your name. Through the crack in the kitchen door, she could see the reflection of Grady's booth. The Mafia boss hadn't sat back down. He stood at the edge of the light, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, Even from here, she could feel his gaze like a weight. Steady, dissecting, dangerous. He didn't believe in coincidences. Not in his world. Grady's fingers drummed once against his glass before he finally lifted it. He took a slow sip, eyes still on the place where Estella had stood minutes ago. His world had no room for accidents. Every man at La Rosa Bianca knew what he represented. Order, control. He'd built his empire with precision. No unnecessary words, no wasted movements. And yet, in that brief exchange, something had cracked his composure. An unknown woman had spoken the old tongue in his presence, her accent unmistakably Sicilian. The name Romano whispered through his memory like smoke, one of the old families, burned from the map years ago. He'd been younger then, sharper, hungrier. Their fall had marked the beginning of his rise. But the girl tonight, she had that same defiant fire in her eyes. He set down his glass, his reflection fractured by the amber liquid. Loyalty had kept him alive all these years, but loyalty had also made him lonely. No one dared look at him the way she had. With fear, yes, but also something else. Something unbroken. A sound broke his thoughts. The kitchen door creaked open. Estella emerged, her hair slightly damp from the rain she'd splashed on her face, her eyes rimmed red. She'd scrubbed the crimson stain from her apron, but the trembling in her hands hadn't stopped. "Hey," Kendra whispered, appearing at her side with a tray of desserts. "What happened? Why did you break a bottle before a customer?" Estella forced a small laugh. She swallowed hard. "He was harassing me. Some drunk, that's all." Kendra frowned, skeptical. "Drunk? He looked like he owned the place. You sure you're okay?" Estella nodded even as her pulse refused to slow. "Yeah, I'm fine, really." But her eyes betrayed her. Kendra caught it, the faint shine of panic hiding behind the polite smile, and softened her tone. "You're too kind, you know that? If it were me, I'd have poured the wine on his head." Estella's lips twitched upward. "Maybe next time." Kendra chuckled and nudged her shoulder. "Next time, huh? Careful, girl. You're starting to catch the boss's attention." Estella froze. "What do you mean?" Kendra tilted her chin subtly toward the corner booth. "He's been watching you, since you came back out. Maybe since before that." Her gaze followed, and there he was, Grady, leaning back now, one hand against his jaw, eyes still locked on her with quiet calculation. The room seemed to shrink, the hum of conversation fading until she could only hear the faint tick of his watch against his wrist. Estella turned away quickly, pretending to clean the counter. "Don't be ridiculous," she whispered. "Ridiculous?" Kendra grinned. "That man doesn't look at anyone twice. You spill wine, he stands up. You come back, he stares like you're the only one in the room. I'm just saying." "Kendra." Her tone was sharp enough to cut the sentence in half. Her friend blinked, surprised, then sighed. Fine. Forget I said anything. But if I were you, I'd stay out of trouble tonight. There's a storm coming." Estella forced another smile. "Yeah, I feel it too." When Kendra walked away, the smile vanished. She wiped her hands on her apron, fingers tracing the faint scar across her wrist, a reminder of the night she'd climbed the burning wall to escape. Her brother's voice haunted her again. "Run, Estella. Don't look back." But tonight, every instinct screamed that running wouldn't save her this time. The world she'd fled had already found her. Across the room, Grady signaled for his bill, but his mind wasn't on the numbers. It drifted back through the years, to the nights when gunfire ruled the streets, to the bloodlines that had built and buried empires. The Romanos had vanished without a trace, but their enemies never forgot debts. Now one of them might be alive, in his city, in his restaurant, and the thought of it sent an unfamiliar chill down his spine. He slipped on his coat, leaving a tip large enough to make the waiter stammer. As he reached the door, his gaze brushed over Estella one last time. She felt it, heavy, assessing, almost protective. When the bell above the door chimed behind him, she exhaled, unaware she'd been holding her breath. The restaurant returned to normal, the clinking of dishes, the hum of low conversation, but the silence inside her remained. Peace had always been her dream. A quiet life, away from names that smelled of gunpowder and betrayal. But peace, she now realized, wasn't something her bloodline was ever meant to keep. The storm outside raged louder. Lightning flashed against the glass, illuminating her reflection. A woman caught between two worlds, pretending she belonged to neither. And somewhere in the dark streets of Naples, the past was already circling back, following the scent of the name she thought she'd buried. The night was heavier than usual, the kind that pressed against the skin and refused to breathe. Naples slept restlessly under a veil of drizzle, the streets slick and shining beneath flickering street lamps. La Rosa Bianca had closed hours ago, yet Estella remained inside, wiping tables that no longer needed wiping. Stalling, pretending, praying the tremor in her hands would fade if she just kept moving. Kendra had gone home. The rest of the staff had said goodnight. The silence felt too large, the rain outside too knowing. She had almost convinced herself that the man from earlier, the one with the haunting eyes and two familiar words, had been nothing but a cruel coincidence. A mistake, a drunk, a ghost. Then the door creaked open again. Her heart froze. That voice, smooth, deliberate, and full of something dark, rolled across the empty room. He was speaking Italian. The cadence, the rhythm of it, wrapped around her like smoke. She turned. Andre stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, that same sharp smirk curving his mouth. The stranger from earlier. Only now there was no crowd, no piano, no one to witness whatever came next. He greeted her in Italian, calling her little one, telling her she should have been more careful. His words were calm, but there was venom hidden beneath the charm. I told you to leave, she said in English, her voice barely more than a whisper. He responded again in Italian, ignoring her switch in language. His tone lowered, his words deliberate, like knives scraping against glass. She caught fragments of what he said, something about how he preferred to speak in her language, the one that belonged to her blood. Her blood. Estella's breath hitched. She tried to steady her voice. I'm not one of you anymore. He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that said he already knew the ending to this story. He said her real name, Estella Romano. It felt like a gunshot, her name. The name she had buried 3 years ago beneath fake papers, forged passports, and lies. The name she hadn't dared whisper since the night the fire consumed her family. She took a step back. You don't know what you're talking about, she said. But her voice was breaking. Andre kept speaking in that fluid, cutting Italian, telling her they had been searching for her for 3 years. And then, in the same quiet, cruel tone, he told her they had finally found her. Her throat went dry. The room felt smaller, darker. When she turned to run, his hand caught her wrist. Firm, but not crushing. The kind of grip that said he could hurt her but didn't need to. He spoke again, softer this time. The tone of a man issuing a promise. He didn't want to kill her, he said. He only wanted her to remember that she could never escape them. Let me go, Estella cried, struggling, her voice breaking in panic. The kitchen door slammed open. He'd stayed around. Let her go. Grady's voice cut through the air like thunder, deep, commanding, cold. Andre froze, the sound slicing through his confidence. Estella stumbled backward, gasping, as Grady stepped into the light. His coat was still damp from the rain, his expression unreadable. Wrong place, wrong time, Grady said quietly. Andre's smirk returned, but it was thinner now, cautious. He spoke again, this time in English. The famous Grady, the one who took over after the fire. Grady's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. You're on the wrong side of my city. Andre's smile twisted. Your city? You think Naples belongs to you? The name froze Grady where he stood. Andre backed away slowly, still smiling. We'll meet again, Signorina, he said, his eyes flicking toward Grady. Tell your new protector he's standing between ghosts and their graves. Before Grady could react, Andre turned and vanished into the rain, his footsteps swallowed by the storm. Silence filled the restaurant, sharp and raw. Estella sank to the floor, her knees giving out, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Grady crossed the room, crouching before her. His tone was calm, but the steel underneath it was unmistakable. Who was he? I don't know, she whispered, tears cutting down her cheeks. I swear I don't. She packed her bag and tried to move. At the door, he blocked her. Estella blinked, disoriented. What? You go nowhere around your place, he said, reaching for her arm. His voice was rough, firm. Not tonight. I can't just. You can, he said, cutting her off. Because if you don't, you'll be dead by morning. She tried to pull back. You don't even know me. His jaw flexed. No, but I know people like him. He shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The scent of him, leather, smoke, rain, was sharp and grounding. It shouldn't have comforted her, but it did. Move, he ordered, his tone soft but absolute. He guided her through the alley behind the restaurant, the rain now falling harder, washing away the last traces of spilled wine from the cobblestones. She stumbled once, her body trembling from fear and exhaustion, but he caught her arm, steadying her without a word. When they reached his car, a dark sedan waiting beneath the flickering streetlight, he opened the door. She hesitated. Why are you helping me? He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes unreadable. Because the men hunting you, he said quietly, are the same kind of men I used to be. Her heart clenched. There was no threat in his tone, only weary truth. She climbed into the car, shivering. As Grady started the engine, the wipers swept away the rain, but not the tension that hung between them. Estella pressed her forehead to the cold glass, the lights of Naples smearing into rivers of gold and shadow. Her adrenaline faded, replaced by exhaustion. She wanted to ask questions, to demand who he was, what he wanted, but the hum of the engine and the warmth of his coat pulled her down. Her eyes closed, her last thought a whisper she didn't dare speak aloud. I'm not safe anymore. Grady's hands tightened on the wheel. One eye on the road, the other on the rearview mirror. He watched the city disappear behind them. His jaw was set, his mind caught between old ghosts and the woman now sleeping beside him. The world returned slowly, like light creeping through heavy curtains. Estella stirred against crisp sheets, her mind swimming through fragments of thunder, headlights, and the low growl of a man's voice. When her eyes fluttered open, the ceiling above her was carved stone, high, arched, and painted in muted gold. She wasn't in her apartment. Panic struck before memory caught up. The alley. The man. Grady. Estella sat up too fast, heart hammering. A soft ache pulsed at the back of her head. The room was enormous. Velvet drapes, marble floors, and a faint scent of cedar and smoke. Someone had placed a folded blanket at the foot of the bed and a glass of water beside her. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free either. The door opened before she could think of escape. Grady stood there, broad-shouldered, rain still drying on his shirt sleeves. The morning light painted sharp lines across his face, making his expression unreadable. You're awake, he said simply. She swallowed. Where am I? My villa, he replied. You slept in the car. I wasn't about to dump you on the street. Estella drew the blanket tighter around herself. You could have taken me home. I could have, he agreed, leaning against the doorframe. But then you'd already be dead. His voice carried no exaggeration, just fact. She looked away, the memory of Andre's words echoing in her mind. We found you. Grady crossed the room, stopping a few feet from her. Who are you really, Estella? He asked, his tone calm but pressing. That man didn't walk into my restaurant by accident. Her throat tightened. I already told you. I'm a waitress. His brow lifted slightly. A waitress who speaks fluent Italian? She hesitated, then forced a fragile smile. Maybe I just have a good ear for languages. Grady's eyes narrowed. Maybe you're a liar. The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock and her own pulse pounding in her ears. When she finally met his gaze, she was startled to find no anger there, just something heavier. Pity, maybe, or recognition. I don't know what you think you saw, she said quietly, but I'm not who you believe I am. Grady leaned closer, bracing a hand on the table beside her. Then convince me. She froze, unable to form words under the weight of his nearness. There was something dangerous about his calm, something that made her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something else entirely. After a long moment, he straightened. You can stay here until I figure out who that man works for. My men will keep watch. I don't need your protection, she said, the edge in her voice weaker than she hoped. His lips curved, not a smile, but close. Everyone needs protection, especially people who say they don't. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. There are clothes in the wardrobe. Breakfast is in the kitchen. If you try to run, I'll find you before anyone else does. And then he was gone. Estella sat motionless long after the door closed, her pulse racing. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, yet her body betrayed her, craving safety she shouldn't trust. Downstairs, she found the villa quiet. Too quiet. Sunlight spilled through tall windows onto polished floors. The air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked earth. On the counter, a plate of toast waited beside a folded note in neat handwriting. Eat something. G. She stared at the note longer than she wanted to admit before setting it aside. When she finally ventured toward the study, voices drifted through the half-open door. She's dangerous, one of them said. It was a deep voice. Dominic, she recognized from whispers around town. Grady's right hand. She's not what she seems, Grady, Dominic continued. People like her don't just walk into your life. You said it yourself. Romano blood built half the fires we still put out. Grady's reply was low, even. I know who she might be. That's exactly why she's here. Dominic scoffed. You're letting sentiment blind you. The Romanos started the war that took half your men. Sentiment doesn't keep me alive, Grady said sharply. Instinct does. And your instinct is to protect her? A long pause followed. Estella pressed a hand to her mouth to steady her breathing. When Grady finally spoke again, his voice had softened in a way that startled her. My instinct says she's not like them. Dominic sighed. Then I hope your instinct's worth dying for. With that, their footsteps faded down the hall. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but certain, like the echo of a promise neither of them could escape. The storm outside the villa had not stopped for 2 days. Lightning split the night like a blade, throwing silver flashes across the wide windows. Grady stood by the fire, a drink untouched in his hand, his thoughts a tangle of questions that refused to quiet. Every step Estella took through his home echoed in his mind. Every lie she'd spoken replayed with new weight. She'd hidden something big enough to bring enemies to his doorstep. And now, staring into the flames, he knew he was done pretending otherwise. He heard her before he saw her. Barefoot steps on polished marble, the sound of a soft breath that caught when she saw him waiting in the dark. You're awake, she said quietly. I've been awake all night, he replied, his tone even but heavy. Thinking. About what? He turned slowly, his gaze piercing. About who you really are. Estella froze. I've given you every chance to tell me the truth, he continued. You lied to my face, hid in my house, let my men risk their lives for you. And all the while you've been feeding me half-truths. Her throat tightened. I never asked you to protect me. No, he said, stepping closer. But you didn't stop me either. She took a step back, her breath trembling. You wouldn't understand. Try me. The silence stretched between them, alive with things unsaid. The firelight flickered against his jaw, carving shadows beneath his eyes. Finally, she whispered, My name. It isn't Estella Moreau. He didn't speak, only waited. I'm Estella Romano, she said, her voice barely a breath. The last one. My family was slaughtered. I ran that night and I never stopped running. The name hit him like a blow. Romano. The same name that had haunted his past. The same family tied to the bloodbath that took his mentor's life. He felt his body stiffen, his chest constricting. My mentor died in that war, he said, his tone low and controlled. He burned in the Romano fire. Her eyes widened. I didn't know. Didn't know? His voice rose, breaking through the quiet. You think you can hide behind your tears and make me forget who started that war? Her eyes shimmered, tears breaking free despite her defiance. I was 15, she said, voice trembling. I didn't start anything. I watched my father die trying to protect us. My brother was executed in front of me. I survived because I hid under the floorboards while they burned our house down. You want to hate me for that? Go ahead. Grady's anger faltered. The storm rattled the windows behind him, thunder booming like a heartbeat. He stared at her, at the pain in her eyes that didn't belong to a liar, but to someone who had already lost everything. He took a slow step toward her. Why didn't you tell me? Because people don't protect Romanos, she whispered. They bury them. The words hit harder than he expected. He'd buried enough people to know the truth of it. Grady exhaled, rubbing a hand across his jaw. His voice dropped, quieter now. You should have told me, Estella. I could have. What? She cut in, the emotion finally breaking through. Protected me? Like you protect your city? You think you're untouchable because people fear you. But I've lived with fear my entire life. I don't need another man pretending to save me just to own me later. Her outburst silenced the room. Grady's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Not rage, but something deeper, something that scared them both. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his voice rough. You think that's what this is? You think I brought you here because I wanted to own you? Then why? She demanded, tears glinting in the firelight. Why keep me here when you should have turned me in the second you knew? He didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed, his hand curling into a fist at his side. Because I saw you, he said finally, his voice shaking just enough for her to notice. Because for the first time in years I saw something I couldn't destroy. The confession hung between them, fragile as glass. She blinked, stunned. The air shifted, no longer cold, no longer sharp. His fury was still there, but beneath it burned something she didn't expect. Protectiveness. Her lips parted. Grady. He reached up, his hand hovering near her face, hesitating like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. You've made a mess of my life, he said, a hint of a smile ghosting across his mouth, though his eyes stayed haunted. And I can't even make myself hate you for it. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. You should. Maybe, he murmured, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch rough but careful. But I don't. The tension cracked like thunder. 1 second she was standing there, trembling. The next, he had pulled her closer, his breath mingling with hers. Their words tangled, their anger melting into something neither of them could name. His mouth brushed hers, once, uncertain before he stopped himself, the air between them electric. She should have stepped back, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, You'll regret this. I already do, he breathed. And then he kissed her, fierce, desperate, the kind of kiss that came from years of restraint breaking all at once. The storm outside roared. The fire behind them flared, shadows flickering across the walls. For a moment they weren't enemies or survivors or heirs of fallen kingdoms. They were just two broken souls colliding in the wreckage of their histories. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, eyes locked, caught between need and reason. Grady's hand lingered at the curve of her neck. "Tell me there's nothing between us," he said quietly. Estella's lips trembled. "I can't." He stepped back then, forcing himself to breathe. He had to, because if he didn't, he knew he'd forget every reason she was dangerous. Before either could speak again, a knock shattered the stillness. Dominic's voice carried through the door. "Boss, you should see this." Grady opened it halfway, his tone clipped. "What is it?" Dominic held out a damp envelope. "Delivered by hand, no return. Thought you'd want to see it first?" Grady took it, his name scrawled in bold ink. He unfolded the single sheet inside and froze. It was a copy of an old council order, a bounty. At the bottom was the Romano family crest, and beneath it, a single handwritten line. "Her survival threatens the balance of everything you built." The signature below it made Grady's blood run cold. Andre. He looked up sharply. The window curtains moved slightly in the wind, as if someone had been standing outside only moments ago. Estella stepped closer. "What is it?" He met her gaze, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. "Proof," he said softly, voice darkening, "that your past just declared war on mine. Would you still trust someone who might destroy everything you've built, if your heart already chose them first? If you've made it this far, you can feel how everything could fall apart in a single heartbeat. Tell me, would you have stayed and fought, or walked away? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next." The rain had not stopped since dawn. It clawed against the villa windows like restless fingers, hissing against the glass as if warning that something was about to break. Estella sat on the edge of the bed in the room that had become her cage and her shelter all at once. The letter Andre had sent, "Her survival threatens the balance of everything you've built," lay open on her lap. She had read it too many times, each word a new weight crushing her chest. Her being here wasn't just dangerous for her. It was dangerous for him. Grady had risked everything, his men, his power, his peace, for a woman who carried the name his enemies wanted erased from history. The last Romano, the one whose blood could ignite a war that would swallow Naples whole. And he didn't even know it yet, not fully. Not what Andre's message truly meant. Estella closed her eyes, the ache in her chest stretching until it became unbearable. She couldn't stay. Every moment she remained under his roof, she made him a target. She folded the letter and tucked it into her coat pocket. Her hands trembled as she stood. It wasn't bravery that drove her now. It was fear disguised as sacrifice. The hallways were silent as she crept through them, the scent of rain and wood smoke thick in the air. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. She passed the study, the kitchen, the empty staircase. No guards tonight. Grady trusted her too much. That trust cut deeper than any chain could have. When she reached the front door, her fingers hesitated on the handle. 1,000 memories collided. The way he had pulled her from the storm, the look in his eyes when he kissed her, the warmth in his voice when he said she was safe. She whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry, Grady." Then she opened the door and vanished into the rain. Grady woke to silence. He'd fallen asleep in the study, the empty whiskey glass still on the desk beside him. The fire had gone cold. The clock on the wall ticked softly, reminding him that the world kept moving even when he didn't. Something felt wrong. The villa had its own rhythm. Footsteps at dawn, quiet conversation in the halls, the sound of her humming faintly when she thought no one heard. Tonight, there was none of that, just the emptiness. "Dominic," he called out. No answer. He stood, his instincts prickling. He crossed the hall in long strides, checking the guest room first. The bed was empty, the blanket folded, the window open. Cold wind swept through the space, scattering the letter that had been left on the desk. He snatched it up and read the first few lines, his heart dropping with every word. You saved me when you shouldn't have. You protected me when no one else would. But I can't let you destroy everything you've built because of me. This isn't your war, Grady, it's mine. She was gone. He didn't remember slamming his fist into the wall, but the sharp sting of his knuckles brought him back. The storm outside roared louder, as if mocking him for thinking he could protect anyone in this world. Get the car, he barked as Dominic appeared in the doorway. Boss, what happened? She's gone. His voice was low, tight. And if Andre has her, we don't have much time. Dominic's eyes widened. You think he took her? I know he will, Grady said. The city swallowed Estella whole. Her coat clung to her skin, heavy with rain. She moved quickly through the narrow streets, her breath coming in uneven gasps. The night felt alive. Too alive. Every flicker of light, every distant echo made her jump. She'd grown up running from men like Andre, from places like this. But she hadn't learned how to run forever. When she saw the small black car parked at the corner, she thought nothing of it, until the driver's door opened. A man stepped out holding an umbrella. He smiled warmly. Miss, you'll catch your death out here. Need a ride? Estella hesitated. The voice was soft, polite, nothing like Andre's. But the way his eyes didn't quite match his smile made her stomach twist. I'm fine, she murmured. He took a step closer. Please, it's not safe. The streets are crawling with people who'd do terrible things to a woman alone. She turned to walk away. Then another man appeared from the shadows behind her. And another. Too late, she understood. Hands grabbed her arms. She fought, screaming, kicking, but they were too many. A cloth pressed against her mouth. The sharp chemical scent burned her lungs. The world tilted. Rain, cobblestones, darkness, then nothing. Grady's car tore through the city like a bullet. His jaw was locked, his hand white-knuckled on the wheel. Dominic sat beside him, scanning the wet streets. Boss, Dominic said, breaking the silence. We'll find her. Grady didn't respond. His mind was somewhere else, back in that kitchen when she said her family burned. The way she'd looked at him as if he was the only safe place left in a world made of ash, and he'd let her slip through his fingers. Check the port, he ordered. If they're moving her, that's where they'll go. Dominic nodded and made the call. But Grady already knew. He could feel it in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive all these years, the same one that told him when a deal was a trap, when a man was about to pull a gun. She was gone, and if he didn't move fast, she'd be dead before sunrise. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, rage bleeding into fear. He'd lost too much to this life already. He wouldn't lose her, too. Estella woke to darkness and the steady hum of an engine. Her wrists were bound. Her head throbbed. She was in the back of a van. Through the slats in the metal, she saw flashes of streetlights, the rain blurring everything into streaks of gold and gray. Across from her sat Andre, dry and composed, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You shouldn't have left him, he said softly. You might have lived longer. Estella's throat ached. What do you want from me? Not you, he said. Your name, your bloodline, you're part of the sin. Her breath caught. I don't even know what he did. He smiled faintly. No. But Grady will die trying to find out. That's what makes this fun. For years he'd been a pain to me. This is an opportunity to get him, and afterwards you join him in hell. She turned away, tears burning her eyes. The walls of the van felt smaller with every mile, every breath. He'll come for me, she thought. He has to. But for the first time since she'd met him, doubt crept in. What if she had broken him the way she broke everything she touched? What if he finally realized she wasn't worth saving? The van jolted sharply, her body slamming against the wall. Andre didn't flinch. "Welcome back to the world you tried to forget," he said quietly. "The world your family built in blood." As the van disappeared into the storm, Grady's car raced through another part of the city, its headlights slicing through the darkness like a promise. Both of them were lost in the same storm, two hearts pulled apart by fate and fear, each one believing the other might already be gone. And in that terrible distance between them, both realized the same truth. Neither of them could survive this without the other. The storm had finally passed, but Naples remained cloaked in a kind of silence that only followed bloodshed. The city felt hollow, streets washed clean but thick with tension. In the heart of Grady's villa, the air was heavy with regret and urgency. Maps covered the table. Red circles marked ports, warehouses, and underground passages. Dominic stood across from him, jaw tight, waiting for orders. Grady stared at the letter again. The one Andre sent, now wrinkled and smudged from his grip. "Her survival threatens the balance of everything you've built." The words gnawed at him, crawling beneath his skin. He finally looked up. "You said you had something." Dominic nodded, sliding a file across the table. "Our men found a lead. She was spotted last night near the old Romano docks. There's movement there again. Andre's using it as a front for his shipments." Grady's eyes sharpened. The docks? That place was burned to the ground after the war. "Exactly," Dominic said. "No one would expect it to be active again. That's where he's keeping her." Grady didn't hesitate. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Get the cars ready." Dominic frowned. "You can't go alone, boss, not this time." "I'm not," Grady said, glancing toward the open doorway where three men were already waiting, faces from another life, old allies he'd sworn never to call again. "We end this tonight." The room went still. Then Dominic nodded once. "For her?" Grady's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "For everything she's made me remember." Meanwhile, Estella sat in a dimly lit room that smelled of sea salt and rust. Her wrists were bound again, but this time the restraints were looser. Andre wasn't afraid of her running anymore. He stood by the window, smoking, his voice lazy but edged with satisfaction. "You know, I used to think your father was a fool. But now I see he was just desperate." Estella's head lifted weakly. "You don't know anything about him." "Oh, I know plenty," Andre said. "He made a deal with Grady's mentor, August Valen. A blood pact to share territories, power, influence. But your father broke it, tried to take it all for himself. And when Valen found out, he burned everything the Romanos owned, including your family. And Valen just somehow found his demise there too." Estella's breath caught. "You're lying." "My father wasn't greedy," she whispered. "He was trying to protect us. He said the deal went wrong. He said someone betrayed." "Exactly," Andre interrupted. "He betrayed them." He crouched in front of her, eyes gleaming. "And now his daughter hides behind the man who grieves in this war. Tell me, Estella, don't you think he wants to finish what his mentor started?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You'll never understand loyalty," she said softly. "You twist truth to feel powerful." Andre smiled faintly. "And yet, you still believe he'll come for you." Estella looked away, but her heart betrayed her. Even through fear and confusion, that single fragile thread of faith held strong. He will come, because he had to. Night fell fast. The convoy rolled through the broken streets like a shadow army. Black cars moving without headlights, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Grady's men moved with silent precision, each one knowing that failure wasn't an option. At the docks, floodlights sliced through the darkness, glinting off the steel containers stacked like tombstones. The sound of waves slapped against the pier, rhythmic and cruel. Dominic whispered, "She's inside that warehouse." Grady nodded. "No mistakes. We take Andre alive if we can. but she comes first. And then they moved. The first shots rang out like thunder. Muzzle flashes tore through the dark. Grady ducked behind a crate, returning fire. The chaos was immediate. Men shouting, gunfire cracking, shadows darting between steel. He saw Andre on the catwalk, smirking down at him like a vulture. "You're late, Grady." Grady ignored him, cutting through the gunman with deadly precision. His focus narrowed to one thing: finding her. When he finally reached the back of the warehouse, he kicked open a metal door, his chest tightening when he saw her. Estella sat on the floor, hands bound, face pale but defiant. The moment their eyes met, something inside him broke and reformed all at once. "Grady," she breathed. "Come on," he said, cutting her free. "We're getting out of here." Before she could answer, the door behind them burst open. Andre fired, the bullet grazing Grady's arm. Pain seared through him, but he didn't stop. He grabbed Estella's hand and pulled her toward the back exit. They ran through the maze of containers as gunfire chased them. Bullets sparked off metal, the sound deafening. Grady shoved her behind a wall, returning fire until his clip ran dry. "Keep moving," he yelled. They stumbled into the open yard, lungs burning, rain hammering down once more. "Over there," she shouted, pointing to the side gate. He kicked it open, pulling her through. They sprinted through the narrow alley that led away from the docks, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. When they finally stopped, it was in front of an abandoned mansion on the outskirts, a crumbling estate swallowed by vines and silence. They slipped inside, dripping and breathless. The door slammed behind them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of their ragged breathing filled the dark hall. Estella turned first. "You shouldn't have come." Grady wiped the blood from his arm, his voice rough. "You knew I would." "I tried to protect you," she said, her voice breaking. "Andre told me what happened, what my father did to your mentor and what your mentor did to my family. You should hate me." He looked at her, rain still dripping from his hair, his eyes shadowed but steady. "I don't care what he said, whatever our fathers did. It ends with us." Her lip trembled. "You don't mean that." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but fierce. "I mean every damn word. I don't care who burned what, who betrayed who. I care that you're standing here and not lying in that warehouse." She looked up at him, tears glinting in her eyes. "You could have died." "So could you," he said, taking her hand. "And that's not something I'm willing to let happen again." For a heartbeat, they just stood there, two people carved out of storm and fire, finding each other again in the ruins. Then she moved closer, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't forgive me. I lied to you from the start." "I've lied too," he said softly. "The difference is I'm done pretending I don't care." Her breath caught. And in that abandoned mansion, beneath the echoes of their past, Grady cupped her face and kissed her. Slow, deep, desperate. Not the kiss of fury this time, but of survival, of relief. When they finally broke apart, her forehead rested against his. Outside, the rain slowed. Inside, hope returned. They had been running for hours. Every shadow, every whisper of the storm outside could have been footsteps. But when the first headlights cut through the rain, Grady knew they were out of time. "They found us," he muttered, checking the clip in his gun. Estella's pulse quickened. "How many?" He glanced toward the flicker of movement near the cliff path, figures in dark coats, the glint of metal. "Too many." Her fingers brushed against his arm, trembling. "We can run." He shook his head. "No. Running's what got us here. It ends tonight." There was no fear in his tone, just the weight of inevitability. Estella swallowed hard, the old terror clawing at her ribs. The sound of boots echoed through the halls now, heavy and coordinated. Andre's men moved like wolves, trained, merciless, closing in from every side. Grady motioned for her to move toward the back of the hall. "Stay low." "But you'll—" "Go, Estella," he snapped, softer this time. I'll find you. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the sea through shattered windows. The light caught on his face, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with something deeper than anger, something like devotion. Estella didn't move. If you stay, I stay. Then we fight. The doors burst open. Bullets screamed through the room, splintering old wood and stone. Grady fired back with precision, dropping the first two men who crossed the threshold. Another wave followed. The thunder outside drowned out the chaos inside. He pulled Estella behind him, returning fire as glass shattered around them. The scent of iron and smoke filled the air. "Grady!" she screamed when she saw a shadow move behind him. He spun just as the shot rang out. The impact threw him back, one sharp, brutal sound, and then silence. Estella froze. The world seemed to tilt. The man who fired stepped into view. Andre. He looked almost regal in the stormlight, his expression calm, his gun still smoking. "You really thought you could protect her?" Grady groaned, pressing a hand against his side, blood soaking through his shirt. "You always were a coward, Andre." Andre smirked. "Says the dog who served a man who murdered her family." Estella's breath hitched. The words struck deep, but she didn't look away. She crawled to Grady's side, her shaking hands trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay down," he rasped. "Don't." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered fiercely. Andre circled them like a shark. "You should have stayed hidden, Romano. Your father's sins weren't meant to resurface." Estella slowly reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers brushed against the crumpled parchment she'd carried for years, the one she'd found in her father's study the night before the fire, the one she had never shown anyone. She rose to her feet, trembling but unyielding. "You're right," she said, her voice breaking. "My father sinned, but not against you, not against Grady's mentor." Andre's smirk faltered. Estella unfolded the letter with shaking hands, her voice trembling as she read. He was trying to stop the war. August Valen made the deal first. It was Andre who broke it, who sold both families to the federal syndicate in exchange for power. The color drained from Andre's face. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," she said, "because I was there the night he begged you to end it. I heard him call you brother. You burned his house with him inside." Murmurs rippled through the men behind Andre. They hesitated, glancing between their leader and the woman whose voice cracked like lightning. Estella's tears finally spilled. He wasn't greedy. He was betrayed. By the man he trusted most. "Enough!" Andre roared, aiming his gun at her. "You think anyone believes that? You think a piece of paper changes what I built?" Grady, bleeding but alive, dragged himself to his knees. "No," he growled, raising his weapon with shaking hands. "But it ends you." The shot thundered through the hall. Andre stumbled backward, shock flashing across his face as the gun fell from his hand. He crumpled to the floor, eyes wide, disbelief frozen on his lips. The silence that followed was deafening. Grady's hand dropped, the gun slipping from his grasp. He swayed, collapsing back onto the cold floor. "Grady!" Estella cried, catching him as he fell. Her hands pressed against his wound again, frantic. "Stay with me, please." He forced a weak smile. "Told you. I'd find you." "Don't talk like that," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "You're not leaving me." Outside, the storm began to die. The moon broke through the clouds, bathing the ruined mansion in silver light. The surviving men stood frozen, watching as Estella knelt over the man who had saved her, over the man who had just broken the cycle that destroyed them all. One of Andre's lieutenants stepped forward slowly, lowering his weapon. "Is it true?" he asked. "What she said?" Estella looked up, eyes burning through tears. "Read it yourself." He took the letter, scanning the inked confession written in her father's desperate hand. His face hardened. "He used us," he muttered. "All of us." Grady coughed weakly. "Then end it. No more blood, no more wars." The lieutenant nodded. It's over. He signaled to the others. One by one, Andre's men lowered their guns, stepping back into the rain, leaving their fallen leader behind. Estella turned back to Grady, cradling his head in her lap. You did it, she whispered. He exhaled slowly, eyes fluttering closed. No. We did. Tears slid down her face as she pressed her forehead against his. Don't you dare leave me now. He smiled faintly, voice barely a whisper. Wouldn't dream of it. For a long time, they just stayed like that. Two souls surrounded by ruin, yet somehow untouched by it. The wind eased, carrying the scent of sea and smoke. When Grady finally opened his eyes again, dawn had begun to break through the windows. Estella was still there, her fingers intertwined with his. He looked at her, at the strength, the fire, the love in her gaze, and knew the war that had shaped them both had finally ended. You're free now, he murmured. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. No, we are. And outside, as the waves crashed against the cliffs and the sun rose over the water, the last of the darkness was carried away. If you had the chance to end a legacy built on blood and lies, would you have the courage to burn it down for love? The sea was calm that evening, so calm it looked like glass reflecting the dying sun in waves of gold and crimson. The town had begun to rebuild itself, brick by brick, wound by wound. Life was quieter now, softer. The kind of peace Estella once thought existed only in dreams. The little cafe she owned sat at the edge of the coastal road, its windows open to the sound of the tide. La Rosa Bianca, she had kept the name, a promise to herself that beauty could bloom even after ruin. The scent of roasted coffee and warm pastries drifted out to the cobblestone walk, drawing in laughter and conversation instead of fear. Her days had found rhythm again. Mornings were for baking, afternoons for regulars who smiled more easily now, and evenings, those were for silence, for watching the sunset fade beyond the horizon. And for him, Grady came every night, never at the same time, never with a word of warning, but she always knew. Something in her chest would stir, a pull she could neither explain nor resist, and then she'd see him through the glass, broad shoulders in a dark jacket, his hair shorter now, the faint scar along his jaw visible only when the light hit just right. He never said much. He'd order coffee he never finished, watch her move behind the counter, and leave a few bills folded neatly beneath his cup. Sometimes their eyes met. Sometimes silence said everything. But tonight was different. Estella stood by the counter, wiping her hands on her apron as twilight deepened outside. The cafe had emptied, save for the hum of soft jazz playing through an old radio. A warm breeze carried the salt of the sea through the open door. When she looked up, he was there. Grady leaned against the doorway, his silhouette framed by the amber glow of street lamps. In his hand he held a single red rose, its petals vivid against the darkness, its stem wrapped in ribbon. For a moment she couldn't move. He smiled faintly, that same rare smile that had once made her forget the world was burning. You changed the sign, he said, nodding toward the chalkboard that hung by the door. She blinked, flustered. It felt right. A new season. His gaze softened. It suits you. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. She could hear the faint rustle of the sea beyond the window, could smell rain still lingering from the afternoon storm. Everything about him felt different, and yet exactly the same. He set the rose gently on the counter between them. I wasn't sure if you'd still want to see me. Estella looked down at the flower, then back up at him. You saved me, Grady. I'll always want to see you. He exhaled, tension breaking into something like relief. I didn't save you. You saved me. Maybe, she said softly. Maybe we saved each other. The words hung in the air, fragile but true. He looked around the cafe, taking in the faint laughter that still lingered in its walls. You built something beautiful here. I wanted to remember what peace feels like, she said, her voice trembling slightly. After everything that happened, I needed to believe peace was possible. He nodded slowly. It is. The quiet stretched between them again, not awkward, just full of everything they couldn't say. The war between them had ended, but the scars it left were written in the way their eyes lingered, the way his hand brushed the counter as if searching for permission to reach for hers. Finally, she said, "You left the life, didn't you?" "I did," he answered. "Walked away from everything. The docks, the men, the money. I still keep an eye on the city from a distance. But I'm not part of that world anymore." "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze. "Because there's nothing left there worth saving. Everything I want is here." The words struck her with quiet force. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint trace of smoke and salt on his skin. "You could stay, you know, not just for coffee." His lips curved into something between a smile and a sigh. "You sure you want a man like me hanging around your nice little cafe?" She reached out and took his hand. The same hand that had held a gun bled for her and carried her through hell. "I want you, Grady. Not the past, not the name, just you." For the first time in years, his armor cracked completely. His fingers tightened around hers, rough and warm. "Estella Romano," he murmured, his voice low and reverent. "You go nowhere. Not without me." The promise echoed through the quiet room like a vow, steady, unshakable, eternal. Outside, the sea whispered against the shore. The storm had long passed, leaving behind a sky streaked with stars. He stayed with her that night, not as a protector, not as a shadow from her past, but as a man who had finally chosen to live again. They stood by the window, the rows between them, watching the horizon fade into silver light. Her head rested against his shoulder, his arm curled around her waist. For once, there were no secrets, no ghosts, no bloodlines to divide them. Only peace, only love. And as the dawn began to paint the water gold, Estella smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to a woman who had survived fire and found her home in the ashes. The cafe would open again in a few hours. Life would go on. But tonight was theirs. If this story stayed with you, leave a word or a thought below. I always read what you feel. And remember to subscribe for the next story, because every ending here is only the beginning of another.